Ake Arts and Books Festival 2022, and welcome to the book chat featuring these two wonderful young ladies who have been introduced. Wanjiru Konangi, let me just give you a little bit of information about her. Very impressive. She's an author and a library restorer. So we'll dig a little bit into that, but that seems to be a wonderful and very complementary pastime to combine with writing. And the book we're going to be discussing is her debut novel, Havoc of Choice. And just to tell you a little bit about the acclaim she's had, runner-up for the Jomo Kenyatta Prize for Literature. Yeah, next time you will win. Claim it. Yeah, and she's a co-founder of Book Bunk, which is a foundation, and that's through that they do the renovation of public libraries in Kenya and turning them into palaces of the people. Wonderful phrase. So with us also is Aisha Atta, and she has written this wonderful book called The Deep Blue Between. And Aisha has probably been writing for a while, although looking at your likely age, you've certainly crammed in a lot of acclamation. She's authored a Commonwealth Writers' Prize nominated work. She's has another work, The 100 Wells of Salaya, which has been translated into 4 languages. Some of her writing has appeared in a variety of publications, and she was recently selected as one of the mentees for the prestigious Rolex Mentor Arts Initiative. Now, as Lola said, I had 2 books to read for another panel, and the books, when I got them, they're really similar, and I thought, oh great, there's lots of ways in which I can draw parallels, etc. And then when I was given these books to do instead, they really are contrasting books in style and in subject matter. But as I read them, it was almost as if you knew you were going to come to Ake Festival and that the theme was homecoming, because both of them in very different ways have very strong strand of being, displaced, the pain and the trauma of being displaced or leaving your home, and that sort of archetypal journey of fighting your way back, if not to home, but at least to the comfort of those you knew from home. So they're wonderful books, and I'm saying this because I don't know if you've been told yet, but if you attend a book chat and you listen to us talking about the books, you have no choice. You have to go and get the book. So this is The Deep Blue Between. So you go get the book, read it, and then see if we have talked sense. This is a havoc of choice, so that you recognize them. Okay, so let me start with you, Wanjiru. And you're going to read us a passage for your book, but before you do that, your book is set in Kenya and amidst the violence that followed the 2007 elections. Were you in Kenya at the time? Did you witness anything that stayed with you and made this sort of, put the seed in you?
Yes, thank you for that question. And thank you to the audience for being here. I am delighted to be at my first Ake. And yes, in 2007, I was in Kenya, in Nairobi, and had actually worked on that election. At the time, in my former life, I worked in the music industry, and we'd noticed that there had been a really low voter turnout of the youth in the elections before this one. And we got some funding, and we ran this project to go all over the country and get the youth to come out and vote. So I was very invested in the 2007 election. I think it was the first one I was voting in, or maybe the second one. So I was in Kenya, and we did our job, and we had the highest voter turnout of all of the elections in Kenya's history, and we were celebrating. We were like, we've done good, and we've used art to change something. And I remember when the violence broke out, we were in our office, we were having a vote counting party, which is very popular in Kenya. During election time, you just kind of gather and you watch the results come in. And nobody could have sensed what would have happened after, because it all happened very quickly. In the span of about 2 days, you have a president who's been announced, first of all, there was a lot of allegations of rigging and stealing the votes, and then this president has been announced and half the country has rejected him, and what they do is that they begin to spontaneously kill each other. So, and the thing about this particular violence, one, it felt very spontaneous, but it wasn't, because now that I've spent 8 years researching it, I know that it wasn't spontaneous. But the thing is, it hit the country in ways that were so different for so many people. I was in Nairobi, but my biggest inconvenience was that I couldn't go to the liquor store. They were closed. Supermarkets were closed. But for so many people, for 500,000 Kenyans and for 2,000 Kenyans, people lost their lives. 500,000 people were displaced, 2,000 Kenyans lost their lives. And for some of us, we just kind of sat back and watched it on the news and being like, is this our country? So I was there. And the thing that struck me the most is just how different you experience this very national thing based on where you lived. And that's mostly what inspired the book.
Thank you. So now we have the setting in the background. Let's have a little taster or a feel for it. You have a passage for us?
Yes, but it needs some context. So without giving too many spoilers, the book tells the story of a family, a political family. The man of the home has opted to run for office. He's married to a woman called Kavata, who has spent her life in the shadow of her political father, hasn't always loved his decisions, and has spent her life trying to run away from the political limelight. Then her husband runs for office, and she flees the country because she can't be in the country as this is happening. But then the violence happens, and the country is scattered, and she's sitting in the US watching the news, trying to find her way back home because Kenya is burning. I have to go be with my family. And when this passage I'm about to read happens, she's sitting on a train with the wife of her driver, who is the man who delivered her to the airport to go to the States and then got arrested because Kavata didn't tell anybody where she was going, so people filed missing persons reports and were trying to look for her all over the country. She's a politician's daughter, and her driver gets arrested because he was the last person who saw her. And so in the journey trying to get home, she meets with the wife of her driver, and this is a conversation that they have. Chepto was resting on the side of the road, peeling off the bandages on the side of her face. They were moist and unsightly and did nothing for their cause. Kavata gasped when she saw how badly Chepto's face was injured. She went over to help and clean up the bandages. Chepto, what happened to your face? Kavata tried one last time, this time in Kikuyu. There was a long silence before Chepto spoke, starting with the day after Kavata left. She had begged Thuo to tell the police what he knew about Kavata's disappearance, but he refused to speak, even when he was being called a criminal. She told her about the days and the nights that she spent looking around the house for clues of where Kavata might have been, so that she could take them to the police station and get her husband released, knowing that if it was up to him, Thuo would remain locked up for months, unable to speak up for himself. She explained that the only reason she left for Nakuru at the very last minute was because she didn't want to leave her husband rotting in a jail cell. Then she talked about the killing and the violence in Nakuru and about the church burning in Eldoret. Everything that Kavata was hearing and everything she wanted to say felt inadequate because it was. Sorry, let me take that again. After everything Kavata was hearing, everything she wanted to say felt inadequate because it was. Chepto's rage was justified. Everything that she and her family had suffered over the course of the past week was linked to Kavata's choice to leave. She put Thuo in that cell, and Kavata and Chepto would never have been in Eldoret by herself if Thuo was with her. She would never have seen all those things. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I don't know what else I can say, Chepto. I'm sorry. She continued chanting her apology, and Chepto, she just looked at her. It was never my intention. Of course you can say that. It wasn't your intention, but it's your fault. And for me, there's no difference between those two. I understand your anger, Chepto. Don't say that you understand my anger. You never will. You know, Kavata, I've always admired you. Even before we met, when Thuo was working for your parents, I really looked up to you. You were always determined not to take after your father. I was so happy when Thuo told me that you took a job as a teacher. I thought, it must be so nice to work just because you want to, not because you must. I can tell you today that you're nothing like your father. The words brought Kavata some respite. You're not like him, but you're not better than him either. Muli, your father, he's aware of his power, and he knows how to use it. He knows its danger, but you don't. You don't understand that every single thing you do affects us as small people. Please don't call yourself small. There's nothing small about you. Chepto rolled her eyes. Yes, but we're the small people. We are small people because we're always the ones shifting our lives so that yours can stay the same. When you tell my husband to work late, it means that we don't get to eat on time, or at all, because he always brings up our supper. When you tell him to lie to your husband, and I'm sorry, I don't care why you did it, Thuo will do it, even if it means that he sits in jail rotting for a few days. And you don't know it because you never have to live with the consequences of your choices, just like these politicians who will never suffer a day because of this election. Kuna watu na viatu, which means there's people in these shoes, literally. Stop denying that to yourself. Chepto waited for a response, but Kavata didn't have one. It was a truth that she had never considered. She hung her head in shame. Chepto softened her voice. You know, I know you don't think about these things, and I know you're a good person, but you must open your eyes. You and I are not the same. And to think that we are is stupid. Kenya has its owners, and you are one of them. I'll stop there.
Wonderful. Okay, so Aisha, let's come over to you. Now, one thing I was very pleased to notice in your book, because I think yesterday we spoke and you're proudly Ghanaian. Mm-hmm. You currently live in Senegal?
Yes, I do.
And your book is quite geographically wide-ranging. Brazil is involved, Nigeria is involved. Have you lived in Nigeria or Brazil? And there seems to be a strong, even Yoruba connection. So maybe you could tell us about that.
Thank you for the question. Good evening, everyone. This is my second Ake, and I'm really pleased to be back. So I have not lived in Nigeria. I've only popped in, and Ake was maybe my third visit to Nigeria. I lived in Brazil for about 2 months. And that's where the Yoruba connection grew, and I began to understand how the Yoruba nation even formed. And for me, being in Brazil was awakening because I saw all these connections with Ghana, even plants that I'd grown up with, I saw in Brazil. And I remember taking a picture of some parts of Salvador, the Bahia, and then pasting it with a picture from Ghana and asking people to decipher which picture was from which country, and people couldn't tell the difference. So it was little things like that. And then the food, there was gari, there was palm oil. And I remember meeting a woman in the train station and just having this connection where she was looking at me and my friend, and obviously because of my skin color, people can tell that I'm not from Brazil, but she was yearning for some kind of a connection. And I was looking at her thinking, this could be one of my aunts as well. So that kind of awakening and realization that there was this big connection between Brazil and West Africa began while I was living there. And then I began research, and I thought, wow, this is really fascinating. And learning things about, West African religion and culture, things that I'd sort of been robbed of, because growing up in Ghana, I remember hearing things like, oh, if you even try to do this thing, it's demonic, or if you think this way, it's, satanic. And then I go to Brazil, and there are these West African practices that have sort of been preserved in time, and I'm coming into contact with for the very first time as a West African. So it was a big awakening for me, and I did a lot of research, and that brought me here to Nigeria, to Brazil, and back to Ghana also.
Thank you. Great. So, well, I think that set the scene very nicely. We've got a feel for both of the books, so let's dig in a little bit.
Should I read?
Sorry?
Shall I read?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. I'm rushing ahead. Please go ahead.
Okay. And I picked a chapter that segues nicely into what we're talking about. So to give some context, this book is, I don't like calling it a sequel, but it comes after my third novel, The 100 Wells of Salaga, which follows a young woman who is brutally kicked out of her family life and sent on a path of slavery in Ghana. And she loses her siblings along the way on that journey. And they haunted me, these two girls. And people kept asking, what happened to them? And I said, I don't know. So this book became the answer to that question, what happened to those two girls? And so one of them ends up in the Gold Coast, and one of them in Brazil via Lagos. So I'm going to read a chapter that's set in Brazil. Salvador da Bahia was like the yellow inside a flower. It was the moment after rainfall when the sun shone in full force. It was every skin shade in the world gathered in one place. As she and Yaya rumbled along in a steam tram, she marveled at how rich everything was around her. It was as if she was seeing, smelling, and tasting for the first time. In Bahia, like a snake, Husseina motored, shedding the pain of her name and her past, and fully embraced Victoria. When they had first arrived in Yaya's small orange brick box of a house resting on a hillside, a whole group was waiting for them. Mostly women, they had lined the house's corners with white and red blooms, had cooked beans, roasted a suckling pig, fried plantains, and doused gari, which they called farina, with thick palm oil. They fussed over Victoria, clutching her to their chests and making sure her plate was never empty. She felt a part of them, even though she didn't always understand what they said, especially when they spoke in rapid musical bursts. She laughed that Yaya's neighborhood was called Liberdad. It made her feel as if she were kicking sand in the eyes of the people who had raided her village and kidnapped her. Now she lived in a place called Freedom. She was Victoria, and she lived in freedom.
Fantastic. Right. So coming back to you, now I love digging into titles, and it's interesting because the passage you chose, as I read the books, I often jot down a little quote that really touches me, and I felt that a quote that really keyed into the passage. The passage that keyed into the title concerning this effect of choices, and the quote that when the lady said that you don't have to live with the consequences of your choice. And I always feel that that sometimes is a problem we have with politicians. They're insulated from the consequences of the choices they make. So they keep making either bad or even wicked choices because they never get the real feel of the backlash. Was that something that you had seen and you wanted to bring out? And maybe tell us about that.
Yes, completely. I think it's something that's true for politicians, but also true for anybody who has any kind of privilege. I've often said that this book showed me all of my biases. And the thing that struck me, and the reason why I opted to put that kind of dichotomy in there is because even during the election, you'd have people who, Kenyans typically travel to their home country to vote there, which actually makes no sense because you should vote where you live and change the kind of immediate neighborhood, but a lot of people choose to go and vote where they're from. And when they do so, either they will keep, they will let their housekeepers, their home staff, either stay in Nairobi and watch the house or go with them and vote with no consequence of does this person want to vote? Do they want to be with their family? Even during the holidays, sometimes you'll see, when I see families holidaying with their help, I'm like, but when do they get to holiday with their family? So I think it's really about the choices you make and who they affect. You can't, if you don't think beyond the bridge of your nose, you're probably hurting someone. And when you hurt someone, you can't say, oh, I didn't intend to, because you, by failing to think beyond yourself, you're definitely going to be overlooking the consequences. This book really forced me to stare my privilege in the eye and address it and cringe at it, but also just be aware of the people who make my life a lot easier, and consciously try to make sure that their interactions with me also make their lives easier.
And another question on this, what the title evokes. When I saw the title, funnily enough, something just flashed into my mind, and that was a phrase with a similar structure, which is the banality of evil. But that now spawned another phrase, which I don't know where it came from, which is the simplicity of violence. In other words, you can be having your normal routine day, nothing special is happening, and in a split second, something happens, violent, traumatic, disruptive, and your life is changed forever. That comes through very strongly in the book. Was that something you were trying to get out when people were trapped in the middle of this violence?
Completely, because I think this violence both shook us to the core as Kenyans, because Kenyans also, we had this thing where in the region of East Africa, we were kind of like the beacon of peace and stability. You're like, oh, look at what's happening in Somalia. It's so bad, oh, poor Somalia. Oh, look at Sudan, so bad, so bad. So in '07, when we became those places we used to pity, and it happened so spontaneously, like everything shifted for us as Kenyans. And now what happens is every time we have an election every 5 years, people grab their passports, they're looking for a way to get out of that country. It's supposed to be the most joyous time of our democratic lives. But as a country, we all go into PTSD because we haven't addressed what happened in '07. We were told accept and move on. It's such a popular mantra today in Kenya, accept and move on. Oh, the lights have gone, accept and move on. Oh, taxes have gone up, accept and move on. But it's not the way we deal with things. I think there's a beauty in sitting in your grief and letting it consume you and understanding what you're grieving and how you can fix it for future generations, because I honestly feel like we go through this potential violent cycle every 5 years because we don't address what happened almost 17 years ago.
Very true, and we feel you here in Nigeria. So Aisha, one thing I really felt strongly in the book, I alluded to it briefly, which is the geographical freedom you gave yourself. And I feel you also, this is my question really, that was also using twins, a part of giving yourself that freedom, because you have the twins and you have them separated. And you also have the dream element where there's some kind of supernatural contact going on. And does that give you almost some freedom in your writing to really spread your wings?
Yeah, the idea of twins actually came from a very personal and selfish place. My last name, Atta, actually means twin. My sister has twin boys. My great-grandmother was a twin, married to a twin. So there are lots of twins in the family, and I just wanted to explore what it was like to be in this sort of dual world where people don't just see you, but see you and see the other person immediately. And so when I began, it was with that one girl and then her twin sisters. And it also became a story of sort of West Africa and her diaspora, because there were people who stayed and there were people who were shipped across to the Americas. And then there were people who also came back, which was a new thing I didn't know. So it was that coming back that became interesting to look at as well. Because when you go to the castles in Ghana, in Elmina and in Cape Coast, there's a door that says the door of no return. So that's how I grew up thinking the story went, that people went and we never saw them again. But there was a coming back. So it's just the duality of how that story of slavery was, of two coasts separated by water, of things happening on the continent and afar, but then just one story being told. Because another thing I realized was, we just heard the story of like the the transatlantic slave trade in the Americas, but there was slavery also going on in West Africa. So it was just a story of twos and things that were going on in two places at different times, or at the same time in two geographical spaces. And water was a good connector and separator at the same time, because for us in West Africa, I'll talk about Ghana, I find we're really afraid of the ocean. We're attracted by it, but it's this thing that has separated us from our past and from loved ones. So it's this thing that has attracted me, but also scares me. And so I just wanted to play with the idea of water connecting these two girls and separating them at the same time, and how one thing can be a thing and its opposite at the same time, which is what twins can also be. So it was just playing with twos that really gave me space to play. Like the girls are very different also. You have one who's extroverted and the other one who's introverted, and then one who needs to go deep into herself and connect with her spiritual side to flourish, and another one who goes outside of herself and helps other people to flourish. And how to connect, they sort of have to become the other in order to bring about change. Yeah, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it's wonderful. And I also want to ask you a question about style, because your writing is quite lyrical or poetic. And not many people know this, but I also write, but no one has ever seen my creative writing. But one thing is that my writing is, I would call it straightforward and plain. But every now and then I wish I could have a more of a flourish. And occasionally I do have one, but I find I have to be in a zone of some sort. How do you do that? And how do you maintain it?
We're the same. I love it when people say my writing is poetic, because I don't think so at all. And I admire poets. I'm like, wow, how do you write poetry? I could not do that to save my life. But the way I think my writing works is I think of myself almost as a cinematographer. I can see the scene, I can paint it, I can describe it to you. I'm really good at description and seeing exactly how things go. But then once in a while, I get into a zone, and which this book was that zone. I wrote it so fast and surprised myself. I think I wrote it in like 7 months, which is a feat for me. The 100 Wells of Salaga was 6 years, so it tells you. And I think what also helped was I'm finally coming into my own as a writer, even though this is my 4th book. I think I'm finally learning to embrace my style and to lean into my process. It's taken a while. So this was the first book in which I allowed myself to use dreams, to play around with words, to just play, and I had a lot of fun doing it. It was scary, it was very scary, because I was also talking about things that scare me, like religion, but I let myself go there, like talking about all sorts of things that if I know some of my aunties read, they'll be like, what have you written? This is demonic, but I let myself go there.
Well, let me follow up on exactly that point, because here's a quote. This is a quote about when they were having Christmas dinner, and in the book it's Yesu, and the Hassan, I get confused between the two, Hassana, says, I couldn't understand, talking about Jesus, I couldn't understand why his death had saved me. We couldn't have been more different. And just in that short phrase, for me, it captured a lot about the whole issue of a foreign religion being brought into the country and everybody adopting it, and then the conflict or the tension between that. Could you expand on your relationship with religion and what you were expressing in this book?
Just to give some context to what he just read. So Hassana is the one who ends up in the Gold Coast, and she stays in a missionary home, the Basil Missionary Home. And one of the actual things that happened in this time in the 19th century in West Africa, on the Gold Coast, was it was a strange time. Slavery was being abolished, and people didn't want it to end. And for some people, going into the missionary home was like going into a refuge, a place of refuge. So the missionaries found themselves in a difficult position. Do they accept people, or do they turn them back into slavery, which is being abolished? So one of the things that they did was make people convert to Christianity. So Hassana finds herself in this space, and she's like, I can't believe this. This is really hard for me to believe. I come from some other place. My God is Otieno. Your God is God and Jesus and the Holy Spirit, 3 gods in one. I don't even understand how it works. So that's where that chapter came from. And for me, I think I have been like this character where I grew up in an interfaith home. My dad is Muslim and my mother is Christian. And my mom wrote once that when I was 7, I came and asked her, is Daddy going to hell? Because I lived in the South. And in the south of Ghana is very Christian, and so anybody who didn't believe in Jesus Christ as their personal savior was condemned to hell. So I was very confused growing up. Does that mean one parent is going to die, and then if you went to my dad's side also, he doesn't believe in Jesus, so where do I situate myself? But I think going to Brazil was really, really good for me because I found something outside of these two religions that made sense for me. And I found it a lot more welcoming and embracing than Christianity or Islam have been. And I've sort of dabbled in both, so I say it from a place of having actually practiced some of these religions. And going to Brazil was this homecoming for me. It really was. It was no matter the color of your skin, whether you're male or female, you were allowed in the temple, in the Candomblé temple. People were fed after a ceremony. There was just this really embracing spirit that I personally haven't found in these two big religions that were forced down my ancestors' throats. Yeah.
Thank you. So, back to you. I want to ask you about your choice of using the family, and particularly Kavata, to enter and really portray the impact of that upheaval in Kenya. I found it very emotional and very moving by being drawn in and close to Kavata and what she was going through, and then the whole, eruption of violence, etc. Was that a conscious choice? Did you think that is the best way I can get this across, or did it just?
Yeah, I really believe in tricking people into caring about things you need them to care about. And when I wrote this book in 2012, so I started it in 2012, and that was 5 years on after the violence. And I spent maybe a year reading everything I could get my hands on. I lived through the election and the election violence, but there was a thing about the time and distance that because I was writing it in South Africa as well, so the distance that kind of erased my kind of sense of texture of what happened. So I spent about between 9 months and a year reading everything I could find about the violence. And I am a journalist, I'm trained as a journalist, and I really wanted to make this book nonfiction. And I tried to make it nonfiction, but I didn't buy it. I didn't think people would care about it unless I made it about the thing that most Kenyans care the most about. My family is everything to me. And I thought if I make this one really dense political book, it's not going to go far. But if I make it about family members and make people fall in love with the characters, all of them, the 4-year-old boy, the 22-year-old daughter, Kavata, her husband, her father, their housekeeper, their driver, I made people fall in love with all of those people because they represented a part of the country and they represented an experience that someone in that part of the country went through. I truly believe that's why the book has been so resonant with Kenyan readers especially, because family comes first. When everything crashes and burns, we always revert to that unit of family, and that's why I keep saying it's a book about family and politics, but never the other way around.
I'm going to have a follow-up question, but I just want to get people ready. If you have any, we're going to move into the interactive session and get you to ask some questions, so you can start thinking of your question. So the follow-up on that is, when you, the book is fast-moving and also very moving. When you were writing it, did you find it traumatic, reliving those experiences? Do you have flashbacks? Did you have to go into therapy afterwards?
You know, it's shocking that I didn't, and I found it very traumatic. There was a scene in the book that I would, at the season of my life when I was writing this book, I would write in the mornings and then go to my 9-to-5 job for the rest of the day, and I'd spend hours reliving these horrible experiences, killing people that I'd spent years building off and building up, and I'd go to work and I'd be angry at everybody. I'd be shouting and I'd be just upset the whole time because I didn't realize what revisiting these events was doing to me. I do think that because it took me so long to write the book, I wrote this book over 8 years and wrote 8 drafts of this book. And the most painful parts of the book are the ones that kept coming back with my editors. They would send back the rape scenes and tell me, I don't believe it, go deeper. When somebody's lost her child, they would send that to me and be like, go deeper. So it was really, really difficult, but I do think there's some catharsis in doing something over and over and over again. I think that trauma came into my inbox when the book was out, and now Kenyans were reading it and having to relive what happened, and then coming to me for help. And I'm like, I'm not a therapist. I don't know how to help you. And after a year of the book being out, we actually did research to find therapists all over Kenya that realized what happened in '07 and were willing to give people free therapy if the book brought up something to the surface. And that was really useful because I think that it needs a trigger warning, and I regret not putting one. Trigger warning for everybody in the room. But I had to go there. It was necessary to shake people in the way that the book does.
No, but I really do agree with you that this tendency one has, which is understandable, to brush things under the carpet, to move on. And I agree with you. You have to go through some kind of, if not grieving or reliving, but just trying to smooth it over and move on. It's not gone. It's not gone, and it comes out in some other way. Well, I could go on asking questions and discussing this for ages, but I wouldn't be forgiven by the audience. So let me share. Can I see some hands? Have we got the microphones? Yeah, we have a hand over here. So over to you. Please introduce yourself and then ask your question.
I'll just ask the question. Thanks. Oh, wow, it's loud.
Keep going, keep going.
Okay, so it's about both books. I haven't read any one. I've bought both of them. Yeah, you guys are going to sign them for me. They seem to have some pretty heavy themes, yeah? So how do you distance yourself from the feelings contained within the story when you're writing them? You know, how do you sanitize your mind, your feelings when you're done writing such heavy themed stories? I would like both of you to answer because it's possible you have different processes. Thanks.
I think for me, but I think for me the writing is the therapy. It's going through, I like to think of myself as the family trauma healer. And right now that I'm writing, so many people have given me things. My aunts have given me letters and notebooks from my great-grandfather. So people are giving me all these stories to process, I guess, what we've been through. So the writing is then taking this information. Even the prequel to this book was because I'd been told about this woman who was enslaved in Ghana. So it became a question of what could she have gone through? And the writing her story was the therapy. So I couldn't distance myself from the hard themes, but by the time I'd finished the book, I felt exorcised of them. So that's the way it was for me, yeah. Yeah, writing is, to me, an exorcism, yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm a little similar. I like to sit in it. I like to let the feeling kind of sit with me for as long as it needs to. And if I have to shake it off, then I will run or go to a festival, or do something else. But I really like to sit in the thing that the book drags up, because I think that if it happens that deeply for me, it probably will for my reader. And that's why we do what we do, yeah.
That's it. Another hand? Can't see very well. Okay.
Hello, hi, I'm Veronique. I'm just interested in what you went through, because in Ivory Coast in 2010 and 11, we had a major crisis which looked quite like yours, I mean, in Kenya, because there was a lot of violence that followed the post-electoral crisis, as they call it. I just want to know, you said you're a journalist and you didn't want to write an overly political book, but how did you manage to stay neutral, or you didn't want to stay neutral, or how did you manage to avoid naming the names, you know?
Thank you. That's a question I get quite often. So I was intent on naming the names. I'm just like, call them out so they can sit in and take responsibility for what the politicians who are running for that election did. My book was picked up by a publisher in the UK first. So I had my first round of edits being done by a UK lens, through a UK lens, and then my second editor was a Mexican lady. And they both were wonderful, gave me such notes. I think Tendai said earlier he likes to be edited. I love to be edited as well. But when the book was just about to come out, I got really nervous because this was a Kenyan story about a very, very painful moment in Kenya's history. And it didn't feel right to put it out there without kind of having the eye of a Kenyan editor. And I found the most different person, male, from a different tribe, like completely different from me. And I told him, please read this book and tear it apart. And he did a wonderful job at showing me all of the places that my bias was showing, basically. He's like, you say this, it's okay to say it, but you're a woman of a certain age, from a certain tribe, and if you say this thing, are you ready for the consequences? If you name these names, are you ready for the consequences? And that was like mind shifting for me. It shifted everything because I had to think about what I want for my career. Do I want to write one book and then run away and not be able to do the library work that I love so much, to do the publishing work that I love so much, or do I want to tweak a few names, call it fiction, and be able to like walk down the streets of Nairobi safely? I don't think that I would be gunned down for this book, but I think that if I made it nonfiction and if I went with a kind of like with my full chest, I maybe would have had to move somewhere else. And I think that's why fiction is such a beautiful thing, because it really gives you the chest to say what you need to say. So people who read this book and were involved in that election will probably see themselves. I didn't change much. If somebody was called Aisha, I probably called her Keisha or something. So you know who I'm talking about. But it didn't need to be the kind of thing where I end my career because of this one book. I want to write several other books. I want to renovate libraries all over the world. And to do that, I do need to be alive.
Yeah. You made a comment, interesting comment, that you love being edited. Can I ask you that question? Mm-hmm. What's your...
Same. So my process is I usually write a very rough first draft. It's a thing I learned from a writer called Anne Lamotte, and she calls them shitty first drafts. So I give myself that grace to write and just pour it out and paint a really sketchy picture, and then I rewrite and rewrite and rewrite. And it's painful rewriting. I hate rewriting. And I hate seeing the red that comes back after I've rewritten and I've sent to my readers. I hate seeing the red that comes when I've sent to my editors. But when I've gone through that painful process of putting my ego aside, it's a word that's come up a lot today, I realize how good it shapes the final product, how much both me and my editors want the book to be good. So in the end, even though it's very painful, it's like teething pains. It's a necessary thing, and yeah.
Okay, great. I'd love to stay on the books, but I also want to find out, or at least let others know other dimensions to you. So let me ask you two things, or in two ways. One, what else do you do? But another way of asking that would be, if you weren't a writer, what would you be doing?
Well, I have an ice cream shop in Senegal.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Which I love. It's almost like writing, coming up with flavors and combining different fruits to see what results I can get from that kind of alchemy, which is what writing is to me as well, putting characters in different situations and seeing what comes of it. So ice cream maker, and I think I really, really enjoy Egyptology right now, so maybe I'd have been an Egyptologist. I don't know, going through ancient what's the word? I'm tired.
Archetypes.
Archetypes. Is it archetypes? Artifacts.
Oh, artifacts.
We're all tired. We're
Yeah.
all tired. Yeah.
Well, don't worry. We'll let you go very soon, but
Thank you.
not quite yet. I can see you in an ice cream van just driving around and then selling
No,
the
it's
stuff.
it's a little shop
Yeah.
on the beach, and
Okay,
yeah, we use just local flavors. So we have the doom fruits for anybody who's from like the Sudan. It's this fruit that tastes like caramel, and it grows in Senegal. We use peanut butter, lots of local things. Bissap, what's it called here? Sobolo, sobolo in Ghana. Sobo, yes, we have that, and just fruits and treats that you can find in Senegal. Yeah.
Fantastic. And, well, we've alluded to one of the other things you do. Tell us about the palaces of the people.
Yes, interesting story. About maybe 20 years ago now, I don't even know how long ago that was, my co-founder, Angela Washuka, who you would have met on a previous panel, we walked into Nairobi's oldest library because we were looking for a home for a literature festival that I used to help produce with her. So we walked into the Macmillan Memorial Library. It was completely neglected. It's a 90-year-old building, and it's like a time capsule of like 1930s Kenya. Everything, the decor, the furniture, the collections, the ethos of the building was stuck in the 1930s. So we couldn't host our very funky festival in that building. But a few years later, or rather in the time between then and now, the idea of what libraries should be and what they can be has inspired us to start this organization called Book Bank, which adopts existing public libraries from the government and just completely revitalizes them. We make them into better libraries, but also homes for art. This is why you can come and attend a conversation like this. You can come and attend a film screening, catch a gallery, catch some theater, because we don't have the luxury of having established art spaces in Kenya, and it's possible to get them all, or you could just make these spaces really, really multifaceted. So we have 3 libraries in Nairobi, and more coming. We've renovated 2 during the pandemic. It was a great time to do it because the libraries were closed, and it was prime time. And I do believe that they're the best libraries in the country at the moment. I dare say in the region, but I don't want to piss people off. And then we also run a publishing house, and who knows what else. Well, I need to write some more books before I pick up more hobbies and jobs.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to keep going with the questions unless I see any hands, because my next question is, and you just touched on it, what can we look forward to? What's coming up? What's cooking? What's in the oven?
I am currently working on 2 projects simultaneously and kind of unsuccessfully. One is a young adult novel, so I'm going to be taking notes about climate change. It's something I care about a lot, and I think that young adults, because I really think that that's where the solutions are. And often if I can't find a solution for a problem in this plane, I will turn to fiction to try and devise a solution that might work. And I'm also working on a romance that will probably take me a really long time to write, but I really want to write a juicy Nairobi romance novel because I just don't read enough like juicy love stories set on our beautiful continent. So I'm going to write one.
So this was my juicy romance, yeah, which is a trilogy. It's the first of 3 books, but I don't know when I'm going to get back to parts 2 and 3. I don't know. It's in the pipeline, but I work now on 2 projects also. One which I've decided is my PhD thesis because I've been working on it since I don't know when. It's on the kola nut. And I feel like I came to Ake and mentioned this, and I'm still mentioning this now, and it hasn't moved at all. So that's one, a nonfiction book on the kola nut and how it shaped West Africa. And the second one is a book that is crazy, but I'm writing it. And it's set in 4000 BC. And I think that's about all that I can say about it. And it's difficult to write because 4000 BC, I try to use a word and then you go to the word roots and you're like, actually, no, the technology didn't exist at that time. So you have to find a way of describing this. But I like the challenge, so that's what I'm doing.
I was going to say.
Thank you.
Writing historical novels must be very tricky because you have to be very thorough because one mistake and people will write to you and stuff.
Yeah, I've experienced it, but People are forgiving, so I keep going.
Okay, well, we're nearly out of time, but this is a question I must get in because it's a selfish one. It involves a quote, but I'll be interested to know whether you agree with the quote. Very important to me because I'm getting on. And the quote is that, this is regards to writing, seniority is more important than talent. Now, how true is this? Because I'm getting on and I'm worried I don't have the talent, but if it's seniority that is needed, I'm good to go. So, was that just a quote from one of your characters, or what do you think about that?
I think experience might be the word I'd use to replace seniority. Okay. Yeah. I want to ask that. What you said.
Yeah. But I think there is something to be said about having lived. And for me, in the experience of life that I'm having now is just we're here on this earth to experience as many things as possible. So seniors have been through a lot more, and I bow my... I'm looking at you. And yeah, but...
Well, was that a hand up? Yeah, okay. So, yeah, well, I could keep going. All I can say is that I had such fun reading both books. And I know I keep alluding to this, but as I was reading the books, both of them, I kept saying, how do they do this? How do they do this? I would sit down and I'll be racing through it, and I'm supposed to be somewhere, and be enjoying it. How can somebody capture me like this? Anyway, you guys, please find out. These are two great books. I'll just mention them again. We have The Havoc of Choice by Wanjiru and The Deep Blue Between by Aisha. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Please thank them for us. We'll take a photograph.
How incredible.